General quarters, all hands man your battle stations.
Broadcasting live on 1470 AM, 95.3 FM, iHeartRadio, and the World Wide Web. This is the Tom Trento Show. Make America think again.
Yes, it is. And Tom Trento here on Monday, the 18th of November. What a wonderful day to be alive and living to be living, obviously. If you're alive, you're living. What a wonderful day for that. We got the 60s. We're in the 60s in South Florida, and we're live on the radio, WNN 1470 on your dial. So we thank you for tuning in. What a show we have today. In a little bit, you're going to hear from John Maher. John Maher is the attorney for a first lieutenant by the name of Clint Lorance. And unless you've been in a cave, Clint Lorance was pardoned, exonerated. We're gonna get the exact legal term from his attorney, John Maher, in a little bit. Clint was one of the three soldiers that President Trump exonerated, freed, pardoned, and Clint spent 6 years of his life behind bars. Ridiculous, but he's free. He was freed Friday evening, and he is home now with his family. You're going to hear from his attorney in a little bit, so stay tuned for that. We may even hear from our good friend Don Brown, who wrote a book about Clint Lorance's situation. He's with Clint right now. They were on Fox News this morning. They're driving around Manhattan. If Don Brown can get to a phone between media interviews, he'll be on too. The big idea for today, and here on the Trento Show, we like to stress you have Don Brown. Well, let's go right to Don Brown, the man of the moment. Don Brown, how are you?
Great, Tom. I wish I were the man of the moment. Colonel John Maher will be calling in a second, but thank you very much for the compliment, and we just fight it one battle at a time. You're the man of the moment as far as I'm concerned, and not just for the moment, but for the year and the decade with all the battles you've been putting in for the good side of good. So thank you for allowing me to be on your show, brother. You know I love you.
We love you too, and what we say around here at the United West, one team, one fight. And your client, because you were representing Clint Lorance, he took those words very seriously, and he stepped away from his life and went on the front lines. And get us up to date on the case and what you're doing right now.
All right, thanks. Praise God, the President of the United States issued a full clemency and presidential pardon for Clint Lorance, Lieutenant Clint Lorance, on Friday evening. And we thought it was going to come. We thought it would be imminent. We had information that it was coming. We thought it might have been on Veterans Day. It was a few days after that, but we're so grateful that it happened. Clint was prosecuted in large part because it looks like they thought he violated rules of engagement. And so we're happy that he's free today. And I'm in New York with him and working with the other members of the legal team to help get his life started again. So it's a great day for the country.
Beautiful. Now, we were in a meeting about 3 years ago. The United West team, the Vaughns, what's that?
John's with us too.
Oh, John is here too. John, how you doing? I got Don on the phone also. We were able to find him. John Maher, you started all of this. Let's go to you first. Then we'll go back to Don. I know Don's on a tight schedule driving around. John, I guess we met. I was just laying out the story about 3 years ago at the Vaughns. You were there, Don Brown, and you asked for help to figure out how to get your client out. Don Brown joined your team and eventually wrote a book, and we've all been praying. John Maher, you are still in the Army Reserves and done tremendous work. What are your thoughts? What's going through your head right now, getting a guy out of prison, and you've spent every minute of your life for the past many years trying to get this done?
It's an incredible moment, not just for me and the legal team and for the Lorance family and for Clint Lorance, but I also think it's an incredible moment for the President of the United States and the Vice President. And here's why. some of the naysayers of the president's decision to take executive clemency for both Gallagher, Golsteyn, and Lorance, they still believe that the president was, quote unquote, interfering with the military justice system. And I respectfully disagree. That's where I've been spending a lot of my time, because now that these cases are in the rearview mirror, there's plenty of work still to be done. And those folks who naysay the president that he should not have interfered, they just have a fundamental misapprehension or misunderstanding of the law. And I don't want to sound too much like a lawyer or a professor or anything, but here's the thing. The President of the United States, under Article 2 of the Constitution, is not only the commander-in-chief, but he possesses the unfettered plenary power of the pardon. Moreover, in addition to being a commander-in-chief and possessing that plenary power of pardon, he also has additional statutory authorities that the Congress vested in him above and beyond the Constitution. And those are Article 22 of the UCMJ and Article 60 of the UCMJ, which vest in the president the authority to be a convening authority, the officer who can convene a court-martial and dispose of a court-martial. And what goes right along with that is the idea that the president can disapprove the findings in the sentence. So that's what we've asked the president to do in the Lorance case, is to disapprove the findings in the sentence, because that would erase Clint's convictions and restore him to the status quo ante. And we're still trying to figure that out right now. But to answer your question more specifically, I've been elated. It's been the case of a lifetime, and I have been surrounded by wonderful supporters, not only like you, Tom, but also brilliant attorneys like Kevin Michaelshek, Don Brown, David Bolgiano, and wonderful investigators like Bill Carney, and then a support base of over 125,000 people who wrote electronic petitions to the president, and then hundreds of thousands who wrote written petitions to the president. So although it's been an investment of 5 years, it's been time well spent, it's been an educational process, and candidly, I hope we've made military justice just a little bit better, not only for Gallagher, Golsteyn, and Lorance, but for any of those guys and gals who may face similar circumstances down the line, that they know that our president has their back.
All right, John, I have a lot to talk with you about, but the first question is, you're an Army guy. You had to work with a Navy JAG officer, Don Brown. How was that? Was that okay?
Well, at the beginning, it was less than ideal, because I don't know if Navy guys ever did a day of work in their life. But Don quickly dispelled that, and I mean that facetiously and with all due respect, and hopefully in the guise of humor. But Don Brown taught me many, many things. He's a far more seasoned attorney than I am. He's got about 10 years on me. And what Don did initially, the entree into the case, was not only his brilliant litigation skills, but the idea that he's an accomplished author in the military space. So by virtue of that, we thought it very, very important, as we met at the Vaughn family home in Florida when you and I met, Tom, and when I first met Don, to bring him in to get Clint's message out in a forum where lots of people could have a widespread access to the facts of the case rather than the Army prosecution's spin of it. So in record speed time, Don Brown, I think in the span of 9 to 10 months, not only did he spend considerable time face-to-face with Clint in the United States Disciplinary Barracks, the penitentiary, but he also studied the record of trial, studied all of our pleadings post-trial, which really where the case arose, meaning the newly discovered evidence, mastered it, and then put together a book and got it to market and got it out such that we could advance Clint's case. And without that book, I really don't think we would be where we are today as soon as we are. So that was a wonderful experience there. And then after the book was published, Don has taken on a more day-to-day hands-on approach, not only in formulating the strategy and the operations, but executing the tactics to get stuff done. And as you can imagine, in a case like this, where there's probably 7 or 8 facets of the case ongoing at any given day, there are literally dozens of decisions that need to be made. And Don has been in on all of them, so much so that, we don't think we would be where we were if Don did not have his relationships by his good reputation with Pete Hegseth or with Sean Hannity or with Linda McLaughlin or with Lauren Sirocco, our friends in the media who really took this case and ran with it.
Yeah, Don, we know you're on a limited schedule. Can you spend a little more time with us?
Yeah, I'm good probably for at least another 15 minutes, Tom.
Okay,
we're
good
right now.
Is Clint with you now, or is he floating around somewhere?
No, Clint is out. He's trying to pick up Clint had nothing to wear, and so he's trying to pick up a couple of extra shirts, I think. So I'm just finishing up a lunch break and block the time to talk to you. So very glad to be with you and my great friend John Maher. You're both great friends of mine, so it's a great place to be right now.
It's pretty amazing that that the President of the United States just a couple of days ago made a decision that impacted everyone's life, particularly you guys and Clint. And we're talking about this on the air, broadcasting from, actually worldwide, on terrestrial radio from Miami all the way up to Palm Beach, covering about 6 million people. And then on iHeartRadio and other mediums worldwide. And Clint, the subject, is out looking for a shirt to wear, I mean, it's just the sublime, the ridiculousness of, I got to wear a shirt. I got to go do another thing. But Don, you spent time at Leavenworth with Clint doing multiple discussions and interviews. What did you discover in Clint as the person, not as the Army officer, leading his men in battle, but as the person, Clint Lorance?
Could you repeat that last part, Tom? I was having a little trouble hearing you.
Yeah, what did you all the time you spent interviewing Clint in the disciplinary area, nice term for jail. He was in jail. He was incarcerated. What did you discover in your interview about the person, Clint Lorance?
Well, that's just a great question. And John can even answer that better than me, but let me just say that Clint is one of the most remarkable young officers, young men I've ever met. He's had a remarkable ability to keep his chin up, to encourage other, U.S. military prisoners there at Leavenworth to not to get down, to try to take advantage to finish their degree. How he has done that has been miraculous. He has a saying, never give up, never give in. He inspires others. And, the thing is that has amazed me and it's amazed John. And I can tell you, John and I have been out there together many times. And first of all, I'm honored and grateful to be on this legal team. And John Maher set out a strategy from the very beginning, which included using the book that I wrote as part of the defense strategy to try to take this, to the presidential level, if at all possible. So he has credit. He gets all the credit for masterminding the design of all this. We're all members of the same team, but John and I have been there many times together. I've been a few times even without John, and every time we've walked out together, John has always made a comment. You and I get to leave. We get to go, over to the nice little Italian restaurant John takes me to in Leavenworth, and we can go home. But Clint's still there, and every time I think he's a remarkable young man. But then we have to leave him, and for me and for John too, is something that really has been something that's burning within us. And so, this is great. When you get to know somebody like, it's one thing to read about it in the media and to be infuriated about it. And this case should never have been prosecuted. It's foolish. I was with an ex-Marine officer earlier, and the observation was made that not one single United States Marines out there on a so-called war crime. And to hear these guys referred to as war criminals as if they are Slobodan Milosevic or Pol Pot is infuriating. But when you get to know the guy and you have to leave him and know that he's still there and what's his hope for springing out before his 20-year, 19-year sentence runs, it's been difficult. So for us, this is a moment of great, it's a great, we're sharing in his freedom. But he's a remarkable young man, and I think you're going to see that. I mean, if you get a chance to go back and see his interview that he did on Fox and Friends this morning, and he'll be on Hannity this afternoon and tonight, I think you'll see what I'm talking about. So it's been, I think, we go through these trials, and sometimes we become better for it. I think both John and I probably share that. This experience hopefully will make us better, I've been grateful to be a part of it, and just so grateful that it's turned out in the way that it has, because we have a president that's not afraid to do the right thing.
I want to talk about that president also. I did catch part of Clint's interview on Fox, and what struck me is the composure for an individual who's been incarcerated for the past 6 months in a prison cell, in a regime where you have to get up, you go to the bathroom in some stainless steel toilet. You have to go eat this food that's terrible. You go do a little exercise, you read. You're confined, and that's the purpose of prison, to confine bad actors, but they also confine wrongly good actors. But usually you would think there's a transition period come out of there to get your head straight, just to breathe fresh air and talk to people. This kid, and I saw some of the interviews online when he got out of the car with his family and all that. Very composed, very controlled, very intelligent. It was really shocking. I thought he's going to take a couple of weeks and go to a psychologist and do all that stuff, but he right out of the box. Now, having said that, John, there could be a PTSD component. Are you guys sensitive and close to him to watch him over the next couple of months?
Yes, Tom, and I think those are very fine observations, and I'd like to make a couple of comments because I think you had a couple in there worthy of noting. Number one, Clint has been of the mindset for the last 5 years that I've known him personally. He said this once, he said it a dozen times. He says, John, it's not that bad in here. Of all the deployments I've been on in the Army, this is the safest one because at least nobody's shooting in here. This gives you a glimpse into this young man's mindset.
All right.
Secondly,
Unbelievable.
One of the things that struck me when I first met him was it broke my heart from a legal perspective that Clint did not get to use that poise, that articulation, that obvious intelligence, that selflessness, and that command bearing and presence in his own defense before the jury. He never testified. And that was a heartbreaker. So one of the things we were trying to fashion as part of the tactics to use in the case is how do we get the country and decision makers to hear and see this young man. And that's enter Don Brown and then enter the Leavenworth docuseries that just concluded last night on the Stars Network, where Clint Lorance, the country finally got to meet him. So many people have reached out to me and said, I've heard about him in the news, I've seen him on the news, I've read about him in the paper, but I feel like after having watched the series and read Don's book, I finally met Clint Lorance. And we think he's our best spokesperson, which he exemplified and personified this morning on television. Another piece to this that I'd like to share with you, you commented about his poise and grace when he first got out of the van. If we could back up and recreate and walk your listeners through what happened earlier that evening, and that is Green Beret Song Toy Raider from Vietnam, Terry Buckler, was on my left flank, and UAP CEO David Gerfine, retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, was on my right flank, as we stood in the commandant of the disciplinary barracks' office from about 4 o'clock that afternoon onward to about 10:30 that night. And the staff and the cadre, they were excited too. They were incredibly professional, very kind, very eager to execute the president's orders. And when they did, we got into a caravan of white SUVs. And then out comes the prisoner SUV. And so we rode in the middle of the night, about 10:30, in a pitch black in Leavenworth, Kansas, along the Missouri River, towards the main gate. And at the main gate, we went through the gate, and that's when Terry Buckler, David Gerfine, and myself got out of our van. We had to present our identification to the guards to quote-unquote, take the prisoner, if you will. He's no longer a prisoner. Now he's released. And that's where we got to hug Clint Lorance, and I whispered in his ear as I hugged him and embraced him. I said, "Welcome home, Lieutenant."
Wow.
You could feel his body convulse a little bit.
Wow.
Then we had to unload. He had about 6 sea bags full of stuff.
Okay.
We had about 6 sea bags full of stuff, or duffel bags, as we say in the Army. So I said to him, are you trying to bust some other guys out of here? What's in this? And then,
wow. I hope you have pictures of your team standing with those two distinguished officers next to you. Did you get pictures of that?
We did later on that
good.
night. And Tom, just to bring it full circle, if I may, I'm almost at the end there. The second wisecrack that was made as we're unloading all these duffel bags was, I thought you were getting out. Did you leave anything back there? I said, what are you bringing out of there? But in any event, then
That's
we got into the van, and the 4 of us are driving off post, and we crossed the street into a nearby hotel directly across the street from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And we pulled up to the front awning, and that's where you see Clint get out of the car, or get out of the SUV.
Wow.
And the scream, what really can't be, I heard from my own experience having been there, the screams of his family and his support base and his friends just to welcome him home, all of which are fly in the face of the Army's characteristics that he was a bad apple off the reservation, a cold-blooded war criminal murder. Getting to know Clint Lorance, that flies in the face of all of us.
Beautiful. Beautiful. This is Tom Trento, WNN 1470 on the AM side, 95.3 on the FM side. 11:22 in the morning. I have John Maher with us right now, headed up the legal team for Clint Lorance. And we did have Don Brown. I think we may have lost Don Brown. Don, if you're out there, you can call back in. I want, John, how much time do we have with you? I know you're a busy guy. We have a few more minutes here.
As much time as you need, Tom. I sure do.
Okay. This is a very, very important story, obviously. A historic story on many, many levels. And we have Don back. Great. I want to ask, Don, I'm going to ask you now, because I know you're on a tighter schedule with Clint running around with him. Friday night, the president made his decision, and then a little right around the same time, the New York Times made their decision and put out a story with a headline, Trump's pardons for servicemen raise fears that the laws of war are history. Let me repeat that for the audience. This is the old great lady, the paper of record, coming out on the same day this historic decision by the president was made about three warriors. Matt Golsteyn, Major Matt Golsteyn, West Point grad, Eddie Gallagher, SEAL, and Clint Lorance. We have the two of the legal team on right now, Don Brown and John Maher. We're talking about Clint. Each of these deserve their own story for sure. But the New York Times, ladies and gentlemen listening out there, they have the audacity to come up with a title that says, Trump's pardons for servicemen raises fears that laws of war are history. Now, Don Brown, in whom were those fears raised that the laws of war are history? Who's the New York Times referring to?
Well, that headline's a bunch of crap. It's an editorial, and the problem is with junk like that is that sensational headlines are generally not based on facts. I didn't see any type of crap like that published by the New York Times when Obama granted clemency to Bradley Chelsea Manning or whatever his or her name is, serving a 35-year sentence and let out after 7 years. You didn't see any type of pushback like that. You didn't hear Vice President Biden, talking about the military justice system being undermined when Obama basically gave clemency to a traitor to the United States. My assumption is they're referring to the president's action in granting relief to all three of these warriors whose names you mentioned, Golsteyn, Gallagher, and of course Lorance. Perhaps mostly to Lorance, but it's just sensationalistic garbage. And I'm assuming that these people, I think it's okay for rules of engagement to be established that favor the lives of the Taliban over the lives of Americans. And by the way, as I've said on a number of occasions, to call these guys war criminals beyond the pale. Every one of these guys took action, and as it turned out, in every case, an enemy combatant died, not an American enemy combatant, and they were all in Afghanistan or Iraq, and so a lot of this I think is just Trump says A and they say B, but if Obama does something, they say nothing. So it's politicized junk, and it's just a really sad commentary that we have the paper that was once considered the most prestigious paper in the world resort to such irresponsible headline, political pandering, which is all that it is. So
and Tom,
me personally, they have very little credibility with me, but maybe some of your audience members feel that they're still credible, but I just consider them for what it's worth.
Yeah, John, what's up, John?
If I could comment on that, and I beg your pardon, I didn't mean to speak over.
No. Come on, we're one big happy family here today. Very happy day.
Pass around the chips.
Pass the potatoes, right?
Yep.
What I'd like to say is this may be a technicality, but it's important. The New York Times got it wrong because there's no such thing under the Uniform Code of Military Justice as a war crime. War crimes arise under international law and international treaty under the Geneva Conventions and the Hague Conventions and other international laws. under the Uniform Code.
John, wait a minute. Breaking news. The New York Times got it wrong. Is that what you're saying?
I am, sir. And this
Okay.
is without a doubt.
Okay, go ahead.
100% incorrect and inaccurate reporting, because there are no war crimes under the Uniform Code of Military Justice,
That's a
which
hate thing.
is Title 10 of the United States Code. In other words, it's federal statutes passed by Congress and the President, where the President implements the rules for court-martial through executive orders. Nowhere in there, and please take us to task on this, will you find an article that says war crime. Instead, you will find articles that say murder, attempted murder, rape, arson, pillaging, and then you will have a number of purely military offenses in there, like quitting your post, or absent without leave, or missing a movement, or disrespect to officers or non-commissioned officers. So the death of war crimes, well, I'm here to tell you, under the UCMJ, is already dead because it was never born.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, John, I'm going to ask you in a moment. I'm going to ask you now, but I'm going to come back to you in a moment to lay out very simply the government's case against Clint. Take us to that day in Afghanistan. Not yet. I got a question for Don first because he's got to get going. Take us to that day in Afghanistan where split-second decisions had to be made, life and death decisions, so our listening audience can get a feel, sort of an existential feel for where Clint was at that moment, and let them have to make that sort of decision, in those moments. So I'm going to ask you to do that in a minute. But Don, I know you have to get going. What is your message to President Donald J. Trump today? If you can speak to him, what would you tell him?
I would just tell the president that I have a son who's a young paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division, and he's deployed in a place that I wish he weren't deployed right now. And for the president who called on young Americans on Independence Day to consider service in the United States military, that's a great call. But the president needed to button these cases up and others like it and send a strong message to our service members and veterans that their commander-in-chief has their backs and we're not going to prosecute Americans for killing the enemy anymore. I really appreciate that as a father. I may be a Navy guy. My dad was Army, my son's Army, and I appreciate that as a father of an active duty paratrooper. And I would say God bless him. I think what he's done is going to bring down great blessings on him. And he's got our support, and I can't thank him enough.
Amen. Don Brown, thank you very, very much. Your book, amazing.
Thank you,
and this is really a historic moment on many, many levels, sending shockwaves through the crazy left. But that's life. You give Clint our love, and when the dust settles, we'll have him on the show and talk to him a little bit.
Will do. Have at it, guys.
Right.
Two great patriots
Don.
signing off. Thanks.
All right, Don, you take care. John, at the bottom of the hour here, 11:30. Tom Trento, your host, The Trento Show, WWNN, 1470 in South Florida, broadcasting all over the place on iHeartRadio. All you have to do is download the app, iHeart, go to WWNN 1470, click in there, and anywhere there's an internet signal worldwide, you can catch us every day, 11 to 12. I got Mark in the control room, Michael downstairs, a couple of other people running around. And we have John Maher, our friend, phenomenal attorney, and an individual who picked up the cause for Clint Lorance, First Lieutenant Clint Lorance, 5 years ago, and said, "I gotta find justice for this guy." Now John is no slouch himself. John, give us briefly your military background. You've served abroad in Afghanistan, and you've been in military involvement all your life. Give us a quick overview of you, and then I want to sketch out that day in Afghanistan.
Well, thank you, Tom. I was commissioned right out of law school into the 1st Infantry Division in Germany and became a prosecutor, otherwise known as a trial counsel, then deployed to the Balkans as part of the United Nations peacekeeping mission to prevent the spread of ethnic cleansing from when Slobodan Milosevic was doing his thing in the late 1990s. Redeployed to Washington, D.C., and became a defense appellate attorney. And on September 6, 2001, I walked out of the Pentagon, transitioning from active duty to become a civilian Justice Department lawyer. 5 days later, we were attacked on September 11th, and I stayed reserve ever since. Since that time, I mobilized a couple of times to the Defense Intelligence Agency, another time to Afghanistan in Kabul and Kandahar, and then a third time to Afghanistan, straight to the second time to Afghanistan as a civilian, where I was a program manager where we prosecuted the Taliban and insurgent fighters to crack their improvised explosive device terror cells, prosecute them, and then reintegrate them into Afghan society by and through the Afghan criminal justice system. I graduated from the Commanding General Staff College as well as the U.S. Army War College and served in a number of different posts in the reserve, and presently I'm a lieutenant colonel, and I don't do too much nowadays, given that I've gone over 20, so I'm in what's called the IRR. But another piece to this, too, is in some of the civilian work we've done, I think it bore directly on the Lieutenant Lorance case. In the latter part of President George W. Bush's administration, I was the general counsel for the United States Office of Personnel Management in Washington, D.C. by presidential appointment. And I think that helped provide a wee bit or a little bit of insight into the workings of the government at the strategic level in terms of how does the pardon attorney's office work, how does the White House work, how does the media cycle work, and how do you get things done at that level. So briefly, the wave tops, that's pretty much my military career thus far.
So I guess the listening audience can conclude you're not some hack ACLU attorney running around trying to change the world. You have dedicated your life to the United States government, to the military, to seeking justice and doing that what's right. We take our hat off to you and thank you. Where were you? Do you remember the moment you heard about Clint's case and you said, yes, I got to do something about that?
Yes, and Don Brown writes about it in his book. I grew up on the southwest side of Chicago in a blue-collar, working-class community where lots of folks are firefighters and police officers and school teachers and tradespersons. And I was back home visiting my parents, standing in my parents' living room, ironing my brother's shirt and ironing my father's shirt as we were dressing to go to a family funeral that morning. My telephone was lying on a footstool near the ironing board, and it was a colleague of mine who called, and I said, I better pick that up. That's a friend. So I picked it up with the telephone in the crook of my ear as I continued ironing, and he says, Johnny, a first lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne's in trouble. I said, will you help? And I said, what's the matter? And he said, double murder and attempted murder, and he's already been tried and convicted. He's going to the Hooskow. And I said, yes, of course, I'll be happy to help. That's the precise moment, and that was somewhere in late 2014 or thereabouts.
Wow.
Then I read the record of trial immediately after. And having read the record of trial, one of the things that came to mind was there's Afghan names all over this record of trial. The charge sheet has the Afghan names listed, but the prosecutor took a pencil or a pen and lined through those names, and having prosecuted the Taliban insurgent fighters using biometric evidence, which is nothing more complicated than fingerprints and DNA, because a terrorist, when he's going to make a bomb, he's going to leave his prints on it, and he's going to twist wires which leave skin. He's not going to wear gloves. And that we have databases in Afghanistan run by the United States government where we're able to, with the accuracy and certainty and trustworthiness of fingerprints and DNA, discern who the real bad guys are from the truly innocent civilian population. It's hard to do that otherwise, and this is almost a foolproof method of doing it. So I said, we've got to identify who these people are, because the prosecution's theory of the killing was mainly that Lorance ordered fire on 3 fighting-age males.
But John, hang on 1 second. I wanted to get the event before the people. Then you can help us with the analysis. But I think we found out, Mark. I think we found out something about John today.
Yes.
He irons shirts. Not only is he a fantastic attorney, but he can iron shirts.
Next time we see him, I'll break out the ironing board for him.
Yeah, that's you're a pure Renaissance man, John. Let me tell you.
My 3 biggest decorations I ever received in the Army were: I'm the best potato peeler. Yeah, I busted out of the stockade myself, and I was the best ironing person in my unit.
You probably cut tomatoes with those shirts.
We have 3 more shows with John in the future, ladies and gentlemen. Especially the one about busting out of the stockade.
Yeah, I want to hear about that one.
Yeah, we got to hear about that. But John Maher is with Tom Trento and our South Florida studios, 11:37 in the morning. Beautiful day, the 18th of November. A little chilly here in Florida in the 60s, but we're loving it. We absolutely love it. And we're discussing a presidential John, you're going to give us the right legal term. I've heard exoneration. I've heard pardon, freedom,
clemency, and everything.
Clemency, all these different terms. We want you to set the record straight. But we're talking about the 3 soldiers that were freed. We'll use the word freed right now by the president Friday. In particular, John's client, Clint Lorance, First Lieutenant Clint Lorance. And what's important, now the folks that have been with us and calling their friends to listen, they don't know. They know that you represented a guy and you got the president to get him off, but they don't know what happened. Can you sketch out in detail as you can the event that put him in Leavenworth in a military prison for 20 years, 19 years, unbelievable.
Yes, sir. Happy to do that. July 2nd, 2012, in the Kandahar province, the Zare district of Afghanistan, in the height of the fighting season, in the birthplace and ancestral home of the Taliban, Clint inherited a platoon because the previous platoon leader was medically evacuated from the field, having suffered peppering shrapnel wounds to the face, eyes, and abdomen, and 3 other paratroopers on patrol had also been wounded in the weeks leading up to Clint taking over. Clint was formerly an enlisted man and became an officer because the Army thought so highly of him. They sent him to the Green and Gold program, commissioned him infantry, and then gave him a combat platoon. On his second patrol that day, the platoon was marching single file behind a minesweeper through a minefield up and down 6 to 8 foot great burns with the mission to deny enemy sanctuary and show American presence in the area. They were going along a patrol route that they have used many, many times before. About 15 minutes or so into the patrol, PFC Skelton, a seasoned paratrooper, was on top of a berm while Lorance was immediately behind him about to scale the berm, and he called out a threat that 3 fighting-age males were riding back-to-back on a single motorcycle towards the platoon's single-file route of march. And this is not in a metropolitan area. This is out in a very agrarian, rural area where it was the hotbed of the Taliban, and almost every time Clint's platoon stepped off, they received fire from traditional firing points, and they were being probed and prodded and scouted from traditional avenues of approach. PFC Skelton fired his rifle at the at the riders, but missed. Lorance never fired his rifle or his pistol, but instead got on the radio and issued an order to a gun truck, which is basically an armored vehicle with a crew-served weapon on top, an M240 Bravo machine gun, and ordered fire on the target. The fatal rounds struck 2 of the riders, and a third escaped. The rounds went off between 2 to 15 seconds, according to 5 witnesses at trial. Those bases right there formed the double murder and attempted murder charges that Lorance faced and was ultimately convicted of.
In other words, a good day. That was a good day. Was turned into a bad day by the legal system.
Right, exactly.
Right. And to bring it forward, what happened was once the platoon, that was the first engagement, then moments and meters away, the lead weapons squad got up on top of the only rural mud hut roof, saw military fighting-age males bobbing and weaving in the fields to the north, waving their arms and working ICOM radios, didn't ask Lorance permission to fire, opened fire, killed 2 more, and wounded Muhammad Rahim in the arm with a gunshot wound to his arm. He was recovered and tested positive for HME, for homemade explosive residue on his hands, and he was treated at Kandahar Hospital. The long and short of it is, when the platoon was egressing from their patrol route back to patrol base, one of the paratroopers looked down at the 2 deceased riders and said, "Oh my God, I think that's the village elder." At that point, the civilian casualty balloon went up. And that's how this case turned from a combat patrol where a paratrooper was exercising his instincts, recognizing a perceived threat of 3 military-age males coming towards his platoon, and the lieutenant acting to protect his platoon, into American paratroopers killed civilians.
A quick question on this. Didn't exactly the same, almost exact same scenario happen like a month later where they didn't shoot and it turned tragic?
Well, I don't know if it was a month later, but I can talk to the Bagram Airmen in December of 2015.
Yeah, that's what
where a number of, Air National Guardsmen from the state of New York were on a dismounted patrol just outside Bagram, and they allowed a motorcycle to ride into their ranks, and that motorcycle detonated itself, killing all of them. And the heartbreaking piece is not one of them used their pistol or their rifle to protect themselves or their unit. So that's the kind of unforgiving decision that is being made out there, where if you hesitate and that motorcycle explodes, Clint Lorance said, if that motorcycle exploded, or if those guys did a drive-by shooting or a grenade toss and kept going, and my paratroopers were hurt or killed because I didn't act quickly, I would be in a different kind of prison for the rest of my life.
Wow. All right, this is Tom Trento at 11:42 in the morning with John Maher, the attorney for Clint Lorance, who was just, John, exonerated, released, freed, clemency. What legally took place Friday by the president?
What legally took place, and again, I have to condition this, Tom, because I haven't seen the actual language the president used, but he issued, according to the White House statement, a full and complete pardon, which basically is allowing Clint to go home. It does not, however, if it's a pardon, it allows Clint to be free, but it does not erase the convictions. And under military and federal law, it does not erase the dismissal, which was signed by the Secretary of the Army. A dismissal is the officer equivalent of an enlisted man's dishonorable discharge. So that's why this case is still unfolding, and there's still a legal issue ongoing in that we need to examine exactly what the president signed. Because in his telephone call to Clint Lorance, the president said, words to the effect, and this is Friday afternoon before Clint was set free, the president said to Clint, I'm going to let you go home here, and I'm going to expunge your record so it's clean.
Right.
Now, the president does not have the authority to expunge federal offenses. By contrast, he does have the authority to issue pardons, and where we hope he focuses his attention is using the correct legally operative words, disapprove the findings in the sentence, and that would expunge everything for Clint.
Okay.
Is he still in the military?
About that, I'm sorry?
Is he still in the military or not in the military? Is he actually
right now? Clint is not in the military, but we don't know for certain. He has an approved dismissal by the Secretary of the Army, which means he's out of the military. He's been discharged. However, depending upon what the president signed, if the president used the words, disapprove the findings in the sentence, it is altogether possible, if not probable, that Clint is in the Army and can be restored to the status quo ante. But the legal team, despite having reached out to the Office of the Judge Advocate General, to the Army Public Affairs Office, to the Office of the Pardon Attorney, and to the United States Attorney in Kansas, where we have a lawsuit pending under habeas corpus for a copy of the information, none has been forthcoming yet. And we really can't fault them because, it's only been a matter of, hours, and a weekend was in between.
Right. I know people want to call in and talk to you, but I'm not going to do that right now because I want to lay this record down. Where did this thing go haywire? There was a basic military confrontation, and then one of the paratroopers said, "Oh, he looks like the village elder." Then it gets escalated. Was it a village elder? Were they arrested on the spot, they being Clint and his guys? Did someone go drag him out of bed later on? What occurred in the ensuing 6, 8, 12, 24 hours?
Well, here's what happened, Tom, and this is all set forth in the record of trial, as well as in our post-trial investigation in the form of affidavits and other evidence we presented. But to cut right to it, what happened was in March of 2012, a couple of months prior to July 2nd, 2012, in the Panjwai district of Afghanistan, neighboring the Zare district where Clint's platoon was conducting operations, Staff Sergeant Bob Bales shot and killed 16 civilians at night. And, of course, there was international outrage, and Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan at the time, of course, objected strenuously. So that was on the minds of many of the chain of command. So the company commander, the battalion commander, the brigade commander, and the division commander, what they did was they immediately separated the platoon from Clint Lorance, put them all in a GP medium tent, and issued them sworn statements saying, "You're all going down for murder." And they ostracized the new lieutenant who had only been with the unit for 72 hours. He was in a different tent. All of those guys had been in combat together and suffered hardships and privations and gunfights, and at that time the unit is purported to have shot and killed at least 52 enemy combatants during their mobilization of their tour. All of that said, Command Sergeant Major Gustafson, if you've seen the Leavenworth series, episode 5 last night, he explains it clearly. He says there's no way that chain of command was going to have any impact on their career trajectory for civilian casualties. So they created a narrative to make Clint Lorance a bad apple who was off the reservation, who determined to fight the war in his own terms, and then continued that narrative all the way through trial. Because he killed innocent.
Unbelievable. He was set up. Unbelievable.
He was set up.
Now, I know there was some unique exculpatory forensic information found post-conviction that
was squashed. Yeah.
That what?
That was squashed. They wouldn't.
Yeah. What was the story with that?
Yes. When you read the initial record of trial, like I did right after the case, none of the evidence I'm about to describe to you was contained in it. And we're former Army prosecutors and defense counsel, and I found it shocking that it wasn't there. So what we found was I initially reached out to my own sources and experts that I had served with in Afghanistan to say, please run these Afghan names and tell me if they're terrorists. And we'll know if they're terrorists if they are in the database with a match, a biometric hit in the parlance or in the speak. And what that means is the terrorist twists the wires, left his skin and or his fingerprint on the bombs at grid coordinates, and we're able to match those fingerprints and DNA with a Tascara or another entry in the system called a biometric enrollment. That's a hit. Much like the police officer pulls you over, you show him your driver's license, he goes to the computer and finds out you have some outstanding speeding tickets. On a far lesser scale, obviously, but that's the first thing. We then learned that 2 of the riders left their fingerprints and DNA on bombs. Mohammed Rahim, who was shot in the arm during the second engagement, left his fingerprint and DNA on bombs at grid coordinates where American personnel and coalition personnel had been killed and wounded previously.
These guys are terrorists.
Right. Secondly, we uncovered what's called a SIG Act, Significant Activity Report, Update 9. That significant activity report was dated August 2nd, 2012, 30 days after the gunfight, which gave rise to this court-martial. In it, the Army Ground Force commander concludes that on the morning in question, Lorance's platoon was being scouted for an impending attack or ambush, and that at least one enemy insurgent was confirmed killed in action. That report was never turned over. Then we uncovered an aerostat operator, which is basically a blimp in the sky over the battle space with powerful cameras on it. And that is called the eye in the sky by troopers on the ground because sometimes you can't see over those great berms. Sometimes you can't see over the ridge line. Sometimes you can't see beyond the structures of the blown up or desolated villages. But the eye in the sky can. So we interviewed that operator. He said, and he made a sworn declaration under oath, which we now have, so I'm not just, repeating what he said. Right. But he said on the morning in question, he was covering down on Lorance's patrol from his blimp. He's on the ground, but the camera's up there in the blimp, the aerostat, and he saw 3 dismounted fighting-age males armed with AK-47 assault rifles communicating on ICOM radios, shattering Lorance's platoon, so much so that he took images of it, captured those images, called the Tactical Operations Center and said, you better tell that lieutenant his platoon's walking into an ambush. Wow. Then made a written report and, guess this, at or near the time of Lorance's trial, called Lorance's defense attorney at the time and said, listen, I've got evidence that could help your client. And Mr. Womack, Lorance's attorney, never returned the call or the email.
Wow.
And then finally...
Wait, John. How does...
The defense attorney.
The defense attorney... Was that a private attorney or a military attorney or?
No, it was a private attorney. The Lorance family, and they're, American family of modest means, very wonderful people. They went to, great lengths to fund this man. And he was a private attorney, a retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel out of Houston, Texas. And he arrived the morning of Lorance's trial. He arrived the night before from out of town. And he was just concluding a 2-day trial out of town. And it was the second time he had met with Lorance. He never interviewed any of the American witnesses. He never interviewed any of the Afghan attempted murder victim or material eyewitnesses. And he never interviewed any of the police who did the investigating. Instead, he relied on the Article 32 pretrial hearing investigation from a year ago. Moreover, at trial, he never exposed to the jury that the soldiers who testified against Clint didn't do so voluntarily. They were under allegations of murder contrived allegations of murder, given grants of immunity in order to cooperate against Lorance. That was never brought to the jury's attention because counsel never cross-examined the witnesses because of it.
But also, prosecution is obliged to show exculpatory information, aren't they? I mean, it's not just on the defense attorney; it's the prosecution. If they get information that says, "Hey, this guy didn't do it," they're obliged to tell the court. Correct?
You are correct, sir. Even if the defense doesn't ask for it, under a case called Brady versus Maryland, a 1963 Supreme Court case interpreting the Fifth Amendment due process clause of the American Constitution, a prosecutor has to, on his or her own volition, disclose exonerating or mitigating evidence that tends to reduce guilt, eliminate guilt, or reduce a sentence. This case is premised upon the fact that in the possession of the prosecution was the biometric evidence that these were not innocent civilians, but instead enemy terrorists, enemy combatants that can be lawfully engaged in combat. Secondly, they never disclosed a significant activity report. Thirdly, they never disclosed the aerostat operator's identity, his report, or his film. Finally, they never disclosed the identity of Command Sergeant Major Golsteyn, who gives us tremendous insight of how the chain of command turned its back on Lorance, created the narrative, and cut him loose. However, the prosecution did fulfill its duties by tendering to the defense the grants of immunity and orders to testify. The problem, though, is defense counsel didn't use it. And the reason he didn't use it, probably, and this is my surmising of it, is because he did not prepare for his case. His client was facing double murder and attempted murder in a fully contested jury trial where Lorance faced life in the penitentiary, and the second time you're meeting the guy is the morning of the trial. That's just
well, John, in New Jersey, where I come from, we say that lawyers like that suck, man. They're really he's a problem. I'm glad he's out of there. You're in there. What a travesty. But you know what? The story's turning out good.
Right.
Yep. We got a few minutes left, and you've been alluding to this documentary series. People now that are interested, because this thing happened Friday night, which is amazing, and it's starting to get press, and it's going to get a lot of notification and notoriety. Where can people go look at the documentary to learn more about Clint?
The documentary is on the Stars television network. You can stream it, or you can buy a subscription to Stars, and it's 5 episodes. And there's probably going to be what's called a coda, CODA, where because in light of the most recent developments, there'll probably be another 6th episode, if you will. But right now, there's only 5, and folks can log on or tune in to Stars, STARZ. And this is not a promotional plug, but again, this is where you can meet Clint Lorance. This is where you can learn firsthand about this case, where if I was speaking too fast this morning on the telephone, you could rewind and watch it again to your own satisfaction.
Now, we got you covered, no problem. And what's life look like? Hang on. What's life look like, John, over the next month for you and Clint and his team?
Well, for me, thank you for asking. There's more work to be done. We've got 3 more paratroopers, 3 more soldiers in the penitentiary there for quote-unquote war crimes, which exist. There's no war crimes provision under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So there's plenty more work to be done. With regard to Clint, I don't think he's had a good night's sleep yet. From 10:30 to Friday night, he has driven with his family 9 hours to Texas, had a party till 3 in the morning there, then got a plane yesterday, flew to New York City, appeared on Fox and Friends this morning. He's going to appear on the Hannity program this afternoon. So I hope that kid gets himself a hotel room somewhere and
get some sleep somewhere.
Right, a big steak, or maybe take a bath, or I don't know. But after that, his goals are he wants to engage in military justice reform, and he wants to go to law school. And he wants to become a defense attorney and a constitutional expert to protect and defend every serviceman or woman who walks into combat who might get this type of treatment. He wants to pay it forward.
Can you imagine that? You know, God working in mysterious ways. The kid's doing his job. He gets locked up, changes his career. And from the little bit I know of him, watching him on television, I know a lot about reading about him. But he's going to make one damn good defense attorney, that's for sure.
What I heard on Fox News this morning, he said, this is actually a good experience because it made help me find America and all these little towns. And I go, oh, my God, I would never, ever in a million years take think of it in that direction.
All right. I'm not going to take any calls because I don't want this to be anticlimactic. We got the lead attorney, John Maher, right here. John, you're a scholar and a gentleman and a patriot.
Can I ask a quick question?
We appreciate real fast, Mark. We're down.
Is there anybody else in a similar situation like this that Clint is?
Let's hold that for another time. I don't want to get off of Clint right now.
Okay.
Let's just stay right on Clint.
Okay.
He's our focus, and we're praying for he and his family. John, take care. We'll stay in touch, and let us know if you got anything breaking. We'll bring you on the show, and we'll see you down in Florida when we all have some sort of celebration for this. All right?
Great.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, and thanks for paying attention to the case.
All right, you take care.
Great work.
That's 11:58 right now. We got about a minute left, and we were going to open it up. I know there were a bunch of people that wanted to call in, but it was just too interesting. And sometimes with people calling in, you go over the same stuff. You go all over the place. And I wanted to lay the record down for the listeners. Very important case, critically important case. In fact, I got stuff on my agenda for today about how Google screwed the United West.
Oh, we're on a blacklist.
Yes, in a Wall Street Journal expose about a 20,000-word investigative report into Google screwing people. The Wall Street Journal mentions us.
As one of the people got screwed.
Yeah, and we were going to talk about that, but I pushed that aside. It was just too important. Thank God for this president and his ability to cut through the clutter. And look at warfighters making split-second decisions and going with the warfighter. Come on, common sense. If you mow down 16 innocent civilians, you got a problem, you go to jail. If you're in the scenario that John explained for First Lieutenant Clint Lorance, he ought to have retribution, the government, and pay him back pay.
Well, that's the reason I was asking. If he's still in the military, they own him 6 years of back pay.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Anyway, we're going to sign off in a few seconds here. Warning to whoever's pushing buttons when I go out here. You got that, Mark? This is Tom Trento. Mark signing off. We'll see you tomorrow, folks. Have a wonderful and safe Monday. See you tomorrow, Tuesday.